I was looking for something to make my end of summer sleepover amazing. What I got was a sleepover that no one would ever forget. Margot, Jenny, and I had been friends for years, since kindergarten even, and we were getting ready to start 7th grade in a few days and wanted to hold our annual slumber party. I had the pigs in a blanket, the chips that Margot liked, the sour gummy worms for Jenny, and a huge bottle of Dr. Fizz for us to share. I was getting the movies ready when I realized I hadn't found our favorite game yet, and started hunting through the closet. We had played Mall Madness, a game my mom had given me from when she was young, and it was a hit at any sleepover. We would shop till we drop, charge it up, and then laugh about who had the best deals and spent the least amount of money. It was great. I had probably replaced the batteries in it a dozen or more times, but I just couldn't find it anywhere. I had always put it at the top of my closet, right beside my old Barbie travel case, but today it was nowhere to be found. I blew out in exasperation, wondering where it could be, but ultimately decided to go check the attic. The game had come from the attic after all, so maybe Mom had put it back up there. I pulled down the ladder, glad it was still daylight so it didn't look so spooky up there, and went to go look for Mall Madness. It was kind of a chore because Mom is something of a hoarder. Dad calls her a pack rat, and it seems pretty fitting. She keeps everything. She had clothes from when my sister and I were little. She's got art projects from when she was in school up there, and she had boxes and boxes of old photos and memory books, all kinds of things. I pushed aside a bunch of dresses and found an area dominated by old toys and games that she had saved. It was a mishmash of dolls and books and some old doll houses and a couple of dusty board games. I didn't find Mall Madness, but I found about 7 others. Apples to Apples was for babies, and Uncle Wiggily looked kind of weird. Don't Wake Daddy was missing pieces, some of which I'd lost, and Monopoly was just too long. I was about to give up when I saw a black box at the bottom of the stack that I didn't think I'd ever seen before. It was covered in dust, the letters barely visible, and I pulled it down, tugging it quickly so the other boxes wouldn't fall. I wiped off the cover and read the red lettering on it slowly, the red and black hard to read since it was so faded. Mystery Man, the name proclaimed, and I was about to open it and see the instructions when my mom called and let me know that my friends were here, so I ran downstairs to see them. I tossed the game onto my bed as I ran past, figuring we would check it out later, and we were soon all laughing and jumping as we got excited about the night. We ate dinner, we played hide and seek in the backyard, we hung out in my treehouse, and as it started to get dark, we came in to watch movies, play games, and start the rest of the evening's activities. Dad works nights, and Mom didn't really ever make us go to bed when we were having a sleepover. We usually passed out sometime around midnight, but tonight we wanted to stay up till we heard my dad pull in from work. We wanted to see if we could stay up till dawn, just to see if we could, and we had enough snacks and sugar to manage it, we thought. By 11:30, we had watched 2 movies, eaten most of the snacks, and drank half a bottle of soda, as we braided each other's hair during the end part of Balto. We were a little bored with movies, and Jenny asked if we could play Mall Madness for a little bit. That was when I remembered the game, and told them I had something different in mind tonight. The game had worked its way half under my pillow somehow, and when I pulled it out, my friends oohed and awed at it appreciatively. We opened the box and found a black board with silver spaces, the big orange phone in the middle having an honest-to-God spin dial on it. We had cards with descriptions on them, and it felt more like we were assembling a police sketch than a dream date. We would go around the board, landing on spaces and drawing cards, and when someone found a card with a number on it, we would dial the number, and it would help us determine the identity of our mystery man. "So it's a little like Dream Date then," Margot said. "Seems weird," Jenny said, "like we're hunting him or something." I looked at the instructions, but they gave no particular instruction on the purpose for making a description of the guy. We would take turns until we had assembled our mystery man, and then we would call 000 on the phone and give our description to the person on the other end. Somehow, they would know if it was right or not, and tell us that we had won, or tell us to try again. Simple enough, I said, and I picked up the dice and rolled first. It was about 4 turns later when Jenny landed on a card that gave her a phone call. She dialed the number, but she was having some trouble until I showed her how the rotary phone worked. Mom had showed me, saying that was how they used to call people 1,000,000 years ago. And once she got the number plugged in, she held the phone against her head and waited for the click. Someone came on after 3 rings, a weird staticky voice that I didn't much like, and whatever it told Jenny, she didn't seem to like it either. After a few minutes, she put the phone down, her hands shaking a little. "Well, what did it say?" Margot asked. Jenny cleared her throat, trying again to get control. I'm not supposed to tell anyone. The phone man said the call was just for me." She handed me the dice, her hands very sweaty and a little shaky, and we continued. It was my turn to use the phone next, but Margot pulled out a card and laid it down. The card let her steal my phone call, and I laughed a little as I stuck my tongue out at her. She dialed the number and held the phone, interested to hear what was to come. None of us thought it was real. Well, Margot and I didn't, but Jenny scooted a little away as she made her call. The voice picked up, and something quick and harsh made Margot's smile slip off her face as she listened. Her lips trembled as she put the phone down, and she wrote something on a piece of paper and shook her head when I tried to pass her the dice. The guy on the phone said to let you roll again. He said some other stuff, but I'm not supposed to say. I rolled again and grumbled as I landed just shy of a phone space. I wanted to hear what had them so spooked. This was a board game, ages 10 and up and all that, and there was no way it could be that terrifying. We continued taking turns, the girls wanting to keep playing, despite their obvious discomfort. Finally, I got my wish. I drew a card after landing on a spot, and it was a phone booth. Searched the deck for a phone card and dialed the number. I took the first one I found and dialed the number, letting it ring 5 times before someone picked up.
"Mystery man is blonde, about 6 feet tall, and a wide-brimmed hat. That's for your ears only, Toots. So don't tell any of those other little bitches what I said. I'll know."
That was a little weird, and I put the phone down with some hesitation. I didn't think they could say things like that in a board game like this. Margot and Jenny didn't bother to ask what he'd said, and I made notes as Margot took her turn. I had a blonde card and a wide-brimmed hat card, but I didn't have one that said 6 feet tall. I guessed I'd have to draw for it. Meanwhile, Margot had gotten another phone call, and as she listened, I saw her glance over at Jenny, and the look wasn't friendly. I didn't know what the phone guy was telling her, but it seemed to be making her mad. We played the game for hours, and in that time, the game got worse and worse. Anytime Jenny got a phone call, it nearly put her into tears. Anytime Margot got a phone call, it seemed to make her angrier and angrier. I tried to take the phone from Jenny at one point, offering to take the call for her, but she shook her head and told me the phone man had said that she had to take it, whether she liked it or not. "Yeah," Margot said, her eyes looking mean. "She needs to take her calls, just like the rest of us." As the game went on, we got more clues. I learned that my mystery man was a 6-foot-tall blonde in a wide-brimmed hat with a mustache, black pants, and a white shirt. I had most of that, but I was still missing the 6 feet tall with a mustache card. The man on the phone had alluded to the fact that Margot would soon make her move against Jenny, the two being like dogs ready to fight. And when Margot threw down a card, it looked more like a knife toss than a friendly showing. "White glove. I get to take one of your cards, Jenny." Jenny nodded, holding her cards out like a fan, and Margot picked the fourth one, pulling it back smugly before glowering at it. "You switched it," she accused, flipping it around to show Jenny a green sweater card. Jenny shook her head. "Nuh-uh." "Yes, you did," Margot accused. "The phone man said you were a cheater, but I didn't want to believe it at first. Looks like he was right." I never cheated," Jenny said, almost crying. "Then why wasn't this a green scarf card? The phone guy..." But she brought her teeth together hard, and it sounded like wood clacking together. "What?" I asked. "What did he say?" "Nothing," Margot said. "Doesn't matter. Just play the game." Jenny didn't look like she wanted to keep playing the game, but she didn't look like she was capable of stopping either. The game would continue, whether we wanted it to or not. And after that, the phone calls got even weirder. I pulled a card, dialed a number, and was greeted with about 10 seconds of heavy breathing before he spoke.
The mystery man has a long, sharp knife. He's walking down the street. Turn left on Martin Drive. I'll soon be there.
That sent chills through me. Martin Drive was 2 streets away. That was like an easy 20-minute walk. What the heck was this? These weren't pre-recordings. This had to be live, but that was impossible. The game was probably 20 years old at least. It couldn't happen. "Look," I said, hanging up the phone, let's just call it a draw. I think this is getting a little too real." And the orange phone rang, and I felt my words wither in my mouth as we just sat there and looked at it. It was like watching a bomb tick down, none of us wanting to be the one to touch it. It just kept ringing and ringing, and finally, to my surprise, Jenny reached out to pick it up. Her hands shook, her breath coming in quick gasps. She lifted it to her ear, and I heard someone snarl something as she winced like she'd been struck. She held the phone out for me, hands moving like someone with nerve damage, and said it was for me. I took it and held it to my ear and said hello. "Whether you play the game or not, you little bitch, the mystery man is still coming. If none of you wins, then he's coming to get all of you. But if one of you manages to win, then they might be safe. You never know. Better finish what you started." I hung up the phone, trying to keep my teeth from chattering as I told them what he'd said. "That's not true," Margot said. "The phone guy told me that I had to beat Jenny or I'd get taken. He said Jenny was trying to win on purpose so the mystery man would get me." Jenny burst into tears. "He said that you two were trying to sacrifice me to the mystery man and that I deserved it. He said I was useless, just holding you two back, and I deserved to get dragged away." I thought about it, weighing what he had said. Sounds like if we all win, then he can't get at any of us. We have to work together to get out of this. Jenny shook her head. "He said if I told you what my mystery man looked like, that he'd get me for sure." "Me too," Margot said, the anger slowly turning into fear. "Well, who cares what he said? He's coming regardless, so we have to do something." So we played the game cooperatively. Helping each other proved a better strategy, and Margot soon had everything for her mystery man. Margot dialed 000 and declared that her mystery man was 5'4" and bald, with a hockey mask and a machete and a white jumpsuit. The voice came from the rotary, making us all jump with its suddenness as it reverberated around the room.
"You have discovered your mystery man, Margot. You are safe for now.
We were still for a moment. Then Jenny reluctantly picked up the dice and kept playing. She got a card, dialed the number, and choked out a sob as the man on the phone told her about her mystery man. "He's on your street," she said, sobbing a little, and I rolled the dice so we could get to her turn again. "White glove," I said. "Let me see him." Jenny held up her cards, but she started nodding at one that was 5 into the stack. I drew it, and sure enough, it was the mustache. Now all I needed was the 6 foot tall and the knife. Jenny went again, drew a card, and breathed a sigh of relief as she dialed 000. "My mystery man is 6 feet tall, dark-haired, with a rope and a long coat." The phone made the sound again before declaring,
Jenny, you have discovered your mystery man. You are safe. For now.
I picked up the dice when I heard something creak the door downstairs. It was long and loud, like a funhouse door at the carnival. I tossed the dice, moved my piece, and drew a card. It was a phone call, and I threw it away and rolled again. I moved, drew, and pumped my fist as I got the 6 foot card. I was rolling again when the phone began to ring. I let it ring, rolling and moving like a madman. I drew, but it wasn't what I needed. I got another phone card and threw it away. I could hear my mystery man on the stairs, moving as slow as any horror movie villain. I drew the gun and cursed as I tossed it away. I drew another white glove card, but I tossed it and kept rolling and moving. I could hear him on the stairs, his boots clumping menacingly. I had to find the knife. I had to banish the mystery man. If I didn't, it would mean my death. He came onto the landing when the ringing phone became too much, and I picked it up and put it down again. It started to ring after a few seconds, and I did it again before moving my piece. I could still hear his boots in the hallway that led to my room, and they grew louder by the second. Jenny and Margot were watching the door to my bedroom like it might explode, but I was focused on the task. Rope, toss. A wide-brimmed hat, toss. He was walking past my little sister's room now. He'd pass Mom and Dad's room after that, and then it would be down to my room at the end of the hall. What would happen if he got to me? Would they even believe Margot and Jenny? Would the mystery man leave them alone once he'd got me? I didn't know, but my heart leapt into my throat. I'd drawn the knife. I was done. I dialed 000 as soon as the door opened to my room. Jenny and Margot gasped, sliding away from the board and as far from the door as they could get. My mystery man has blonde hair, a wide-brimmed hat, is 6 feet tall, has black pants, a white shirt, and a knife. I practically screamed it into the phone, falling forward to cover it as I expected that long, sharp knife to stab into me at any minute. I heard the tone, and then heard the phone crackle again.
That was a close one, Heather. You're safe from your mystery man. For now.
I just lay there for a while, panting and trembling, as Margot and Jenny came to comfort me. They told me they had seen him standing in the doorway, his blonde hair spilling beneath his hat, and a sharp knife in his hand. He had raised it, took a single step, and then just disappeared into nothingness. We lay there, just kind of basking in the feeling of being alive, until I heard my dad pulling into the driveway. We had made it. We stayed up until sunrise, just like we wanted to. I went down and hugged my dad, who seemed surprised that I was still awake, but glad to see me, and then the three of us turned in. I put Mystery Man back in the attic, and have never touched it again. One brush with death was enough for me. So if you find a copy of your own while trolling through the thrift stores and antique malls in your area. Be very careful with it. The mystery man you find might not be a mystery for very long. Excuse me, I'd like to return this book. Mark sighed. Not another one. I'm very sorry, ma'am, he said, turning around on his stool to find the short redhead already looking unhappy. But all sales are final. She was tapping a copy of Wind in the Willows on the desk, and Mark grimaced as he saw the cover bow a little. When Mark had opened up this used bookstore, his retirement, he liked to joke, he had expected simple days of reading, writing, and enjoying conversations with fellow bibliophiles. What actually ended up happening was a constant stream of book collectors, people looking for deals, and homeless people looking for somewhere to use the bathroom. He'd been here for less than a month, and everything seemed to be going wrong already. Case in point, this mysterious thing with the books. He opened Wind in the Willows and knew what he would find inside. The beautiful illustrations of Toad Hall were there, but the words were gone. Some of the words were there, he noticed, as he flipped through the pages, but the majority of them were gone. This was the 10th book like this he had received in as many days, and it was becoming a big problem. He couldn't sell the books with missing words, and he shook his head as he opened the register and took out the $5 the lady had spent on it. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I have no idea how this keeps happening with these books, but I mean to get to the bottom of this. The lady nodded, mollified. See that you do, young man. I had bought it for my grandson, and he was very disappointed to find it in such a state. Mark nodded, but quietly suspected that her grandson hadn't given much of a damn about the book. Most of the child customers didn't have the attention span for anything without pictures. Wind in the Willows was probably not on his radar, and the little goblin would have probably preferred the Captain Underpants books he had on the display rack near the graphic novels. Mark waited until she was gone and moved out into the shop proper so that he could look through some of the books. He didn't know how this was happening, but he wanted it to stop. Words suddenly missing from books was bad for someone who paid the bills off the backs of bibliophiles, and as he started pulling random books off the shelves, he was alarmed to see that the tales of adventure around Toad Hall were not the only casualty. After an hour, he found 3 Dean Koontz novels, a couple of John Grisham's, and 3 Stephen King's, one of them a hardback copy of Firestarter, and about 7 more from writers he wasn't as familiar with that were either missing words or missing whole chapters. It was infuriating, especially since he didn't understand how it was happening. He could understand if the books had been wrecked, but the books were often in perfect condition, except for the missing words. The copy of Firestarter could have gone for $25 to $45, and there wasn't a dog ear or a coffee stain to be found on it. Mark threw it across the store, pouting like a child as someone walked in and found him sitting in his little pile of ruined books. Geez, Mark, have a little more respect for the written word. Mark cast his best unimpressed expression at Wayne before tossing a John Grisham at him, which he dodged. I've got all the respect in the world for the written word. I just don't understand why it chooses to treat me like this. Wayne opened up the copy of Firestarter, the corner now dented in, and tutted as he looked over the pages. That's really weird. How long's that been going on? Mark slumped against the shelf, closing his eyes as he tried to fight off the headache that was building. About 2 weeks. Wayne stroked his chin, humming in a very convincing manner. Wayne was known in a lot of bookseller circles as a practicing wizard. That was the nicest thing that he was usually known as, and a lot of them called him a nut or a crazy. Wayne also had a pretty substantial following online, running a paranormal podcast and doing a lot with the local ghost hunting community, so he had money to burn. Wayne liked him. They had hit it off after a few encounters, and now Wayne came in almost every day. Could be something supernatural, Wayne said, looking over the John Grisham that Mark had thrown at him. Tell you what, let me ask around and see if anyone else has experienced anything like this. Mark shrugged. Couldn't hurt, I guess. Shoot, there might be something to that. Maybe I've got an angry poltergeist that likes stealing words or something. Wayne shook his head, flipping the pages and looking at the words still on the page. I doubt it. Ghosts usually don't affect things like this. I guess anything is possible, but I've never heard of a ghost stealing words from a book. I don't know. I'll ask around. Maybe it's something I can help you with. He took the copy of Firestarter with him, with Mark's blessing, and Mark started cleaning up as he moved the damaged books to a box behind the counter. His expectations were low, but he hoped that Wayne could help. He loved his bookstore, and he didn't want to close up shop due to something mysterious that was out of his control. Let it be poor bookkeeping, or lack of interest, or a fire, but not something he had completely no control over. Whether Mark succeeded or failed, he wanted it to be on his own efforts. Mark flipped the sign from open to close and locked the door as he prepared to go into his loft over the shop. It had been an all-right day. He had sold about $200 in books, thanks in part to Mrs. Shaw's summer reading list, but he'd found 4 more books with missing words. Nothing quite as financially devastating as the copy of Firestarter from earlier, but it was beginning to add up. The box of ruined books was now 20 in number, and Mark knew that there would be more. He turned off the lights on his little book kingdom and moved upstairs to start dinner. That was a problem for tomorrow, because now it was time to work on his real passion. Mark went up the stairs to his cozy little studio apartment, and after making something in the microwave, he sat down in front of his old typewriter to set to work on his novel. The novel was a sequel to his only bestseller, Ghosts of Lorelei. The book had been immensely popular about a decade ago, even getting a single season on NBC before being canceled, and a lot of reasons that the bookstore could operate in the red for as long as it had was thanks to the book sales from Ghost of Lorelei. His editor had been on him about writing a sequel for years, and after 10 years of middling crime novels and lukewarm police procedurals, Mark had decided to give it a go. Ghosts of Lorelei had been about Detective Jack Stryker as he hunted for a missing schoolgirl named Lorelei Hester. Lorelei's ghosts were the rumors, the friends, and the trail that grew colder by the day. Stryker found the girl, but it turned out that she hadn't been abducted, as her parents believed. Lorelei had overdosed on something on the roof of an abandoned building, but Stryker had to exorcise her ghosts, the masks that she had showed to others. When he finally discovered the real Lorelei, it was too late to save her, and Stryker was left with the bitter taste of failure and the corpse of a girl looking for escape. It had been a great story, and people had loved Stryker, the grizzled old detective who was sure that he had seen it all. His editor wanted a sequel, maybe a series about Jack Stryker, but Mark had never quite liked crawling into the skin of the old man. That's what he called it when he wrote, crawling into the skin and playing pretend for a while. Jack Stryker's skin, however, was leathery and not altogether comfortable. That's why it had taken him so long to get back to him, and why it had taken him so long to start the fiery effigy. He was clacking away, liking the feel of the keys beneath his fingers as he worked. Most people had upgraded to a computer or something by now, but Mark liked the way that writing on a typewriter made him feel. Something about hearing the click-clack of the keys, seeing the paper fill with words, and then running a fresh sheet in when you were done made his writing feel like an accomplishment rather than a chore. His editor wasn't such a big fan, not really liking the manila envelopes that he got with pages in need of editing, but Mark told him that was tough shit. If he wanted the story, then he could take it Mark's way, or not at all. Mark was enjoying his trip back to Chicago in the early 60s, Jack Stryker chasing a serial killer who seemed to have an axe to grind with Stryker himself. All the victims so far had been people he had helped, clients or friends or old colleagues from his time on the force, and all of them had been burned to death. Captain Reinhold seemed to think that Stryker might be in on this, a suspect if not the killer, and Stryker found himself at odds with the police as he tried to track down the sicko. The killer was 3 victims deep now, but Stryker was hot on his tail. He had chased him to an old apartment building. He was chasing him up the stairs, the lights dim and making his target hard to identify, and as they came to the roof, Stryker felt he had him at long last. He kicked open the roof access, his big old .45 out and ready, as he checked his corners and looked for the man who had been killing his friends. "It's over," he graveled out, taking a step out of the doorway. "There's nowhere to go but back the way you came. I've got you dead to rights." Mark hissed, letting the Salisbury steak fall into the plastic holder as it burned his tongue. He blew on the meat, his eyes never leaving the page, and tried the bite again as Stryker made his way across the roof. He was checking the spaces between two big AC units when someone lunged and knocked his gun away. The two tussled, the man's hood covering his face, but as Stryker pushed the hood away, he gasped in surprise as much as in pain when the man pushed him back and made a run for it. "You!" Stryker said, watching him run for the stairs. "It can't be! You died 20 years ago!" He grabbed for his gun, but the shot missed as the hooded man made it back into the stairwell. Stryker tried to follow, but he was still 10 feet away when the door banged open, and two patrolmen came out with guns drawn. "Jack Stryker, you're under arrest for the murder of Frank Richard and Moira Fisk. Drop your gun and put your hands up." Mark nodded as the sheet came out, loading a fresh one in as he typed. Yeah, this was good. This was real good. As someone laid on their horn on the street below, Mark sat up violently. He was in bed, a book laid across his chest as the lamp on the nightstand glared in his eyes. The car horn had only been half the fright. He had been dreaming, having a real nightmare. He'd been down in the shop, the whole place shadowy and muzzy, and every book he pulled off the shelf was empty. All of them, every single one, was empty of any words. They were piling up, their covers full of fresh white paper, and as he dropped them, they became a sea of pages. They churned and bucked, threatening to swallow him into the inky depths, and just as his head had threatened to go under, he had woken up with a start as the car horn blared. Mark looked at the clock and found that it was about 5:30. He could get up, make some breakfast, and write for a few hours before he had to open up the shop. Last night he had written so much, getting through the interrogation scene and Stryker's escape from custody. Now he was on the run, trying to find the killer before the cops caught up with him. Mark figured he was about 75% done, in the home stretch now, and he would soon send it all to his editor for final proofing. 20 minutes later, a breakfast sandwich in his hand, Mark sat down to start writing the search for the killer. Stryker now knowing who it was, but not sure how to find him. He had a fresh piece of paper in the typewriter, glancing down at the manuscript before freezing in pure dread. He picked up the top sheet, the start of chapter 9, and his hands shook as he looked at it. There were holes in the paragraphs, gaps where the words had been neatly removed. "How?" he whispered, his hands shaking so badly that he thought he might tear the page. "How can this be?" It was one thing when it was down in the shop. There was no way he could go over every piece of inventory to make sure it was whole. But this was something he knew had been completed. He had written this. This was his. And now it was like moths had come in the night and eaten holes in it. Mark was shocked, outraged, and as the paper ripped near the middle, he forced himself to put it back down. He would have to recreate it. He would need that sheet to get it just right. He didn't know what he would do, but Mark knew that he had to do something. The bookstore was his retirement, but this was his livelihood. He had to protect this by any means necessary. "Excuse me," said a young fella, and Mark saw him flinch as he turned to look at him. Mark must have looked a mess, but that was to be expected. He'd been writing like a madman for the last 3 days, and for those 3 days he had been sending his work off at the end of each session. Sometimes this facilitated a trip to the mailbox at 3 a.m. Sometimes it left him tired as he opened the shop the next day. But it was worth it, if it saved his manuscript. His agent likely thought he was losing it, and maybe he was, but it kept whatever was doing this from eating his work. I was just wondering if you had any of the old Star Wars paperbacks," the kid said, stuttering a little as Mark cast his bloodshot eyes on him. "Third row, middle shelf," Mark growled, turning back to his computer screen as he furiously worked on his inventory. It wasn't hopeful. Mark had discovered about 15 books over the last 3 days, and the box was becoming fuller and fuller as he went on. He had lost about $500 of stock so far, and he knew that there was more to be found. The kid came up with a few books, one of them going into the box as Mark discovered that it had been ruined too. The guy wanted to buy it anyway, and Mark lifted an eyebrow as he handed it to him. The guy was leafing through it, looking at the holes in the paragraphs and shaking his head. "That's wild. How did you do it? I've never—" But he stopped as he glanced at Mark's face. Mark had been holding out his receipt, but it had gotten crushed in his shaking fingers as he glared at the kid. "You think I did this? You think I would do this to my books? Who the hell are you? Get out! Get out now!" Mark was unaware that he was shouting, but he couldn't stop himself. The guy might as well be accusing him of murder, and when he ran out of the store with his books, he nearly bowled over Wayne as he ran out. "Huh," Wayne said as he watched the guy take off. "You having a fire sale or something? Deals must be good. That guy practically sprinted off." Mark shook his head, pointing at the box of books. "Where have you been? I thought you were going to get me some answers. I'm losing books by the day here." Wayne put his hands up. "Easy, hoss. Apparently what you've got is pretty rare. It isn't something that a lot of people know about, and I had to look pretty far to get you answers." He took a little book out of his pocket and opened it to a marked page before laying it on the counter. Inside were a pair of mischievous-looking foxes, words hanging from their mouths, and they appeared to be eating them. The words ruin or rune were written above them, and Mark thought the name was pretty fitting. Even so, he looked at the page skeptically. Are you telling me that foxes are stealing my words?" "No, not foxes. Runes, or ruins. Translation wasn't very clear, but it's definitely something like that. They're from Germanic folklore, little creatures who eat written words. They also collect secrets and will ruin archives and libraries. They used to be favored by wizards who used them to steal their enemies' secrets, but now the ones that are left usually just make trouble for writers and bookstore owners." "Seems like something I should have heard about," Mark grumbled. Wayne winked at him. "Hard to, when the little buggers eat most of the accounts of them." "Okay," Mark said, still not believing any of it. "So, how do we get rid of them?" "We trap them. We catch them in a journal, or something that contains secrets that they can't resist. Then we trap them inside with magic. Once they're trapped, they'll eventually wither away when they run out of words to eat, or someone comes along and breaks the magic on the book and they go free. By the time either of those things happen, they'll have gotten rid of the book anyway. Most people throw it away or bury it in a hole, but some people put it in a lockbox just to be sure." Mark sighed, not sure he believed a word of this, but willing to try anything if it would stop this from happening. "Okay, what would it take to do this?" "Give me a couple of days to get the proper stuff together, and I'll conduct the ritual for you. The materials are pretty cheap. I'll come by tomorrow night after closing, and we'll get this done. Sound good?" Sure, Mark said, letting Wayne get back to whatever occupied his day. Mark didn't think anything would come of it, but whatever could be done. If nothing else, maybe it would help him figure out what exactly was going on. Either way, it would break up his usual routine, and Mark felt that if he spent another day watching his profits slip down the toilet, he'd go crazy. His phone rang then, and when he answered, it was with the usual, "Second Chance Books, Mark speaking." His agent cleared his throat and asked if he was feeling okay. "Terry," Mark said, feeling a little better as his agent's voice rolled over him. "A little stressed about the new shop, but I've been converting it into work on the book. Why, is there something wrong with the new pages?" "Yeah," Terry said, sounding less than amused. "You sent me 3 envelopes in the last 3 days, and they've been getting weirder and weirder." Mark furrowed his brow. "How so? I thought the story was progressing well." "Well, the second envelope looked like someone took whiteout to it, and it's like playing Mad Libs to figure the story out. This last one is just blank sheets with random words on them. I know I said I wanted to see results on this book, Marky, but if you're having a mental breakdown, then maybe take a day or two to collect yourself, all right? Mark felt the phone shaking his hand, his voice barely holding up as he told Terry that he would get some rest and feel better. Terry said that sounded great and wished him well before hanging up on him. Mark let his cell phone fall beneath the desk, putting his head in his hands as he wept. He had been careful, so careful, he had sent it away to stop this kind of thing from happening, but it was all in vain. They had gotten his manuscripts anyway. They had eaten it up, and they would do it again. Mark found himself thinking of the ruins or runes as something real now, and as he wept, he wondered what he was going to do. If this ritual or whatever didn't work, just what the hell was he going to do? When Wayne arrived the next night, he found the store closed. He knocked, and when Mark answered the door, Wayne could tell he was drunk. "Geez, Mark, you had it a little early, aren't you?" Mark shrugged, but he didn't deny it. In reality, he had spent the night before drunk and had simply carried over into the next day. He had been beside himself as he tried to figure out what to do, and the whiskey had been an easy outlet. Mark had never been a big drinker, but he found it soothing to fall into a comfortable numbness. He had come out of it just in time to remember that Wayne was coming over around 7, and he had stumbled downstairs just in time to hear him knock. He let him in, and Wayne produced a mead notebook from his coat. "I collected some secrets from my counterparts. Some of them are pretty juicy, too. If this doesn't draw them in, then nothing will." He passed the notebook to Mark, telling him not to open it as he sketched some symbols on the bar. Mark watched the lines bulge and swirl as his head reeled a little. There were squiggles inside the circle, ancient-looking letters and strange crabbed swirls, and as he finished, he bit his thumb and dropped some blood into the center. To Mark's amazement, the circle glowed faintly, and when Wayne took the journal and positioned it in the center of the circle, the two stepped back like hunters from a trap. "Now we wait," he explained, but it didn't take long. It was like watching graffiti move, and Mark thought he might be hallucinating. He saw these sketches of foxes moving across the counter. Some looked like pen, some looked like pencil, and there were even a few that looked like charcoal prints. They were in many different styles and skill levels, and they all made their way towards the book. They entered the pages, eating the secrets, and when the last of them hopped in, Wayne struck. He lurched forward and slammed the book shut, the symbols burning themselves into the notebook. Mark heard a small scream from the counter. Wayne waited for the burn marks to stop forming before picking up the notebook and holding it out to Mark. "All gone. You should be fine now." Mark started to reach for it, but felt like he didn't really want to touch it. He told Wayne to take it, and the man seemed happy to oblige. He said he had hoped to study the little creatures, and as he left, he was humming happily to himself. Mark was just glad to be rid of them, and he felt better than he had in days. Mark jerked awake again, almost certain that the last 4 days had been a dream. He was lying in bed, a book across his chest, and felt like maybe he had been dreaming everything after the car had woke him up. If it hadn't been for the hangover, he might have even believed it. He had celebrated a little more after Wayne had taken the ruin away. Or was it rune? Mark couldn't remember, but he was glad they were gone. He had reached down to close the book when something caught his eye. Someone had doodled a little animal on the edge of the page, a dog or something, and Mark wondered how he'd never seen it before. When it moved off the page, still clutching a word in its mouth, Mark realized the truth. It landed on the floor, and Mark rolled off the bed and gave chase. It was like a cartoon, the little pencil-drawing fox easily escaping him as he ran after it. Mark didn't know what he would even do if he caught it, didn't know if he could catch it, but he knew he was mad. They had been caught, trapped in the journal, and The thought that one had been missed pissed him off mightily. It would get away and make more, and then they would continue to torment him. He had to nip this in the bud, get it before it could escape, and as it slipped under the door, he thundered down the stairs after it. He came into the shop, still livid, and that's when he saw them. The ruin, or rune, or whatever it was, disappeared into the shop, but the shining eyes of multitudes looked back at him in the light spilling from the stairwell. There were so many of them that Mark knew they would never get them all. It was hopeless. They would never stop. Not unless he stopped them. The gasoline went up as it took hold of the bookshelf, and Mark laughed in his stupor as they burned. It was like a roach infestation, he thought, as it caught the dry books. Better to burn the whole nest and start over than spend months or years fighting them. He laughed like Nero as he watched Rome burn, and it wasn't until it was too late that he realized he was trapped. That made him laugh all the harder. It looked like the fiery effigy was him in the end. Stryker's story would never be told, and he would take it with him to the grave. Before he passed out, Mark thought that at least these little terrors wouldn't have his final story. He had ruined it all himself, and hopefully took them with him. I'm standing on the International Space Station's revolving deck as I write this to no one in particular. Every 30 seconds, it rotates around so you can see the Earth as it hangs in space. I was entranced by the calm little ball of water and dirt from the first time I saw it. It's so easy to forget how chaotic it is down there. From the cold and silent reaches of space, you forget that the Earth is full of honking horns and screaming people. It's so easy to forget that terror exists in places other than Earth. I was honored, thrilled even, when they told me I had been selected to reside on the International Space Station. I'd been dreaming of space since I was a little kid. Like many kids my age, I had decided that I wanted to be an astronaut. Unlike many kids my age, though, I meant it. Every class, every grade, every extracurricular, and every internship had been tailored to get me to this point in my life. Every move I had ever made had brought me to this point, standing on the rotating viewing platform so I can watch the Earth circle around. At least, I could until about 8 hours ago. I awoke at 6 a.m., International Space Station time, as I do every day. I took my morning shower, made my first cup of coffee of the day, and walked into my kitchenette to make my breakfast. Then I took my breakfast to the rotating platform so I could eat it as I watched the Earth roll lazily by. But when I came to the platform that morning, I was in for a surprise. As I glanced out of the thick glass window, I was greeted with nothing. I could see a few satellites drifting lazily through the inky vortex. I could see the usual collection of debris just waiting to burn up in Earth's atmosphere. I could see the stars as they twinkled in the darkness of space. I could see the other planets as they winked further from the station. What I could not see was Earth. I can still see my broken coffee cup as it spreads its liquid across the floor. My overturned bowl of oatmeal is sitting near it. I'm standing not 10 feet away from the place I stood when I discovered there was no Earth. As I sit writing, I can hear the sounds of chaos that have invaded my once peaceful haven. The crew is going mad, running rampant with panic. They now know what it must feel like to be a newborn who's been clipped from his umbilicus. Hal laughed when I told him what I had seen. Hal is the communications officer for the station, and he thought I was joking with him. When it became clear that I wasn't joking, he tried to hail the command center in California, just to put my mind at ease. They would pick up, and I would see that the whole thing was just a big misunderstanding. When they didn't answer, he seemed unsure, but not alarmed. "That's just interference. I'll try the center in Florida," he said with a little laugh. No answer. He tried to hail system control in 5 different countries. No answer. We attempted to contact anyone within the sound of our voice, and also received no answer. Only then did he come to the observation deck with me and verify that there was no Earth. Someone's crying. I can hear them sobbing from the crew quarters as I sit and stare into the void. There were a lot of people mourning when the Earth disappeared. When I left my room and walked out here, I could see the signs of suicide as well. Vivina, one of our science team members, was lying on her bed as I walked by. The door was open, and she looked so peaceful as she lay there. Still, I knew she must be dead. A line of foam slid from the corner of her mouth, and her chest moved not at all. Others had hung themselves. You could see them hanging like strange wind chimes from the vents in their rooms. There were no firearms on the station, but I could hear the research lab table saw running full blast, and I could guess what sort of business it was doing. Others were using this as an excuse for bad behavior. The mess hall was full of people, eating the food stores and drinking what little alcohol we had available on the station. I was sure a certain amount of rape and murder were going on as well. As I stood there stargazing, though, it hardly seemed to matter. Very little matters now. We are adrift, our umbilicus cut, and we're all living on borrowed time. The air would cycle through the air handlers indefinitely. That was a given. But without food and water, we would die. Our food comes on a shuttle from Earth once a month. We were not equipped to grow our own food. No seeds, very little soil on board. Once our food is gone, we will starve. At the rate we were eating the food in the mess hall, we'd be lucky to have food for the week. I put a hand against the glass, momentarily dizzy. I see the red handprint left behind and know I have to finish writing this quickly. They've left me alone for now, but if the puddle of blood oozing into my chair is any indication, I don't have very long. Hal and I took our findings to the head researcher. Vaughn looked over the numbers, checked the data, and then came with us to the observation deck to see for himself. By this point, several of the researchers and the other station staff had gathered to look out into space, hoping to find that familiar blue orb we all loved so much. When they saw him, they all came to Vlan for answers. Vlan was stoic in the face of their fear, answering their questions evenly and putting their minds at ease. I'd known Vlan for years, an Israeli native drifting towards old age, and I had never seen him lose his cool. He didn't start now. I don't know what has happened, but I think what is important is that we not panic. We were hand-picked for this mission, and we must act like we deserve to be here. Go about your duties as you would any other day. When news surfaces, I will let everyone know. He called a meeting with Boggs, head of security, Mortimer, director of operations, Charlie, Hal, and myself. Charlie was my boss, the head researcher under Vlan, and very, very British. I believe the most important thing here is to maintain order. We have around 100 people on board, men and women, and if anarchy breaks out, then we may never over this. Over this? Mortimer asked skeptically. Pull your head out of your ass, Charles. The Earth is gone. We don't know that, Charles stated, wiping his bald head with a handkerchief. I've got eyes, same as you, and they tell me the Earth is not where it's supposed to be. Now, either we've drifted, or we aren't where we're supposed to be, or... Oh, don't pretend you know a damn thing about what's going on here, Charles shot back hotly. We pay you and your wrench jockeys to fix the air handlers, keep the pneumatic doors running, and maintain the systems on the station. You're no astronomer, Mortimer, not by a long shot. Mortimer turned red as he stepped closer to the blustery Englishman. Mortimer was no egghead, that was for certain, but he had served in 2 wars and was the most exceptional nuclear submarine tech the program could have laid hands on. He was also a bristling mass of service tattoos and sculpted muscle. I had seen him working out in the gym, giving the heavy bag a run for its money daily. Charles was about to learn what that bag knew for a certainty. Just because I didn't go to some fancy university doesn't mean I'm country dumb, you little insect. Gentlemen, please, Vlan shouted, bringing the 2 back to their senses. We have a problem, and your fighting is not helping. We have not drifted. Our telemetry tells us that we are occupying the same position in space that we've been holding since the beginning. We have not moved, unless our telemetry is wrong. It's not, Charles said smugly. Then something has happened to the Earth. It's our job to keep the peace, Mortimer. Tell your people to go about their tasks as they would. Boggs, tell your security staff to maintain order and not get too excited. I don't want public hangings, but I do want to see malcontents going to the brig. Charles, keep your people on task and keep their minds occupied. Maybe you could push forward our agricultural programs for the time being. Food may become a priority. Dismissed. He may have dismissed them, but their animosity remained. For the next few hours, tensions slowly built between the science team and the maintenance team. Mortimer could be seen talking to his crew, casting dark looks at anyone from the science team that got too close. The talk was loud and angry, and many of Boggs' security crew would also be seen in these discussions. Boggs seemed to share Mortimer's outlook on the current situation. The two were soldiers, after all, and saw us as little more than egghead civilians who thought too much of themselves. Charles was just as bad. He sealed off the science lab and put us to work on greenhouse projects. He stormed around like a rat in a cage, snapping at people for no reason, and confiding to his group of favorites about the stupid roughnecks who thought they were better than us. He kept looking towards the door fervently, and I knew he was thinking the same thing I was. Boggs had an override key to all the doors on the station, and if those roughnecks decided that they wanted into the lab, there wasn't a goddamn thing we could do about it. At 10:30, Vlan called Charles. The two had a very heated discussion, as quietly as possible, of course, but it was evident that something was going on. Charles turned pale towards the end, and his eyes kept slipping back to the door. He was afraid of something out there, more fearful than I'd ever seen him. When the phone suddenly went dead, he put it in the cradle with all the reverence of a casket going into the ground. They made their move around noon. We had heard some dissident noises from outside, but Charles wouldn't let us leave. He told us to keep working and never mind what we heard. The missing members were not commented on. They had never shown up this morning, but we all just kept doing our best. As the noises came closer, I saw many of the scientists looking anxiously at the door. We all glanced over when it opened, and our fear was realized. In walked 8 members of Boggs' security detail, followed by Mortimer and 8 of his maintenance crew. As I mentioned, there were no guns on the station, but they all had batons or wrenches or knives from the kitchen tucked into their belts. They blocked the door as they fanned out, and it was apparent what they intended to do. Charles was livid. "What are you about? We're performing serious work in here, so if you could just—" "By order of Overseer Boggs, we are taking the science team into custody," Mortimer announced, a huge grin spreading across his face. "Overseer? Vlan will have something to say about this. When I tell him what you've done, he'll—" But as he approached Mortimer, the big man swung a monkey wrench he'd had in his hand and scattered Charles's teeth and blood across the lab. Charles fell like a sack of oats, and pandemonium ensued. We all broke, making for the door and hitting the wall of guards. I don't remember how I got away. All I remember was a brilliant flash of pain in my side, and someone bumped me hard. Suddenly I was in the hall, running for Vlan's quarters. The corridor rang with screams and noise. People were running as other science teams were being rounded up by security staff. As I ran, dodging groups of security staff as they chased others, I was aware again of the pain in my abdomen. That's when I looked down and saw the handle sticking out of my side. The blade it was attached to was long and sharp, a kitchen knife used for boning fish. When I pulled it out, it was red with my blood, and the blood wasted little time in dribbling out of a new hole. I shrugged out of my lab coat and tried to tie it off like a tourniquet, but it did little more than give the blood something new to stain. I felt a little dizzy. I wanted to sit down, but I knew this was the wrong time to do it. I kept going, hoping Vlan would bring peace to the station, but I already feared what I would find when I got to his office. I didn't even have to go in to see what they'd done to him. He was slumped over his desk in a pool of his own blood. Someone, probably Boggs, had cut his throat for him and left him where he lay. I turned to go, and at that minute, I think I was already planning on coming here to die. I dropped the knife on the floor and walked unnoticed through the hall. I saw bodies, I heard the screams, but I was ambivalent to them, as I was to the vacuum outside. I couldn't help them, and they couldn't save me, so what was the point of belaying the inevitable? My eyesight is getting foggy now. I think I came here hoping to see Earth blink back into existence before I die. I don't know if I really was or not, but it would make me feel better to know that there still is an Earth out there. As chaotic as those billions of humans are, I don't think I want the few of us still alive here to be what my species will be judged by. They've proven that humanity, even the best of humanity, will revert back to apes at a moment's notice. Survival of the fittest, even in space, is not a hallmark I want on display, but it seems to be what this station's history will be left with. I'm going I'm going to sleep now. My fingers are numb. The rest seems like a good idea. If this is truly my final message, then take some solace in knowing that I died doing what I loved. I died among the stars, hoping for hope for the earth and its people. I've been in a coma for the last 6 months. I was fortunate, they say. The semi-truck that hit my car killed my mother and my fiancé, but spared me. Well, not spared, I guess. I had 2 broken legs and a shattered collarbone, and I was in a persistent vegetative state for 6 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. I woke on April 26th, 2021. I couldn't heed the call, and that's why I'm the last Josh. The news is still coming in from across the world as people kept finding bodies. The occurrence had been as sudden as it was unexplainable. The death toll is estimated to be nearly 1 million, all from different states, different countries, different walks of life. It's being called one of the most devastating events of the 20th century, and the level of cover-up going on to keep the public outcry to a minimum is alarming. They're trying to say that it's nothing but a meme, an internet joke, a fun fight that happened with pool noodles and foam swords. The truth is that on April 24th, for some reason, everyone named Josh just kind of snapped. I didn't know this at first, of course. When I woke up, the hospital staff was just glad I had woken up. The doctor had been hopeful, but every coma's different. I was the subject of a lot of attention for the first few hours as they told me what happened and tried to get in touch with any family I might have in the area. My dad died when I was little. My grandparents on both sides have been dead for years, and I have no other siblings. I was alone, no family or future family since my fiancé was dead, and I was having a lot of trouble processing it. That was the first time I heard about the Josh battle. One of the techs was taking my vitals, and he mentioned it offhandedly. "Shame you were in a coma, kid. You missed the big Josh fight." I blinked a little confused. I'm sorry? "The Josh fight. It's a whole thing. Look," he elaborated. He pulled out his phone and showed me a bunch of happy, smiling people fighting with foam weapons and pool noodles and other padded things. They seemed to be having a great time, and it stuck with me long after the tech took his phone and continued his rounds. Why would they call it a Josh fight? It appeared to be some silly thing that had happened suddenly, but I couldn't do any research on my own. My phone had been destroyed in the accident, and with no immediate family to talk to, I was in the dark until the next day. That was when Brown arrived. I'd woken up from a nap and found a dark-haired man sitting in my hospital room. He wore thick black glasses, had short brown hair, and wore a close-cropped beard that looked patchy. He smiled when he saw me, putting his phone in his pocket and giving me his full attention. "Good, you're awake. I've been waiting for you to wake up. Are you with billing or something? I have insurance if that's what you're..." He waved me off. No, nothing like that. "My name's Brown. I'm here to inform you that you are one of the last Joshes on Earth." I raised an eyebrow. Is that some kind of joke? There are millions of Joshes on Earth. How the hell can I be one of the last? Well, it's a long story, and no one's quite sure why this thing happened at all. What we do know is that 2 days ago, all the people named Josh suffered from an unexplainable psychotic break that seems to have struck them all at once. It lasted for 24 hours, and when it was done, they all returned to normal with no memories of what they had done. If that's true, then why am I still in this hospital bed? I was pretty sure he was just some crackpot who had wandered in, but I was just bored enough to entertain his crazy ideas. "Well, you may not have gone anywhere, but the nurses tell me that you tried. You apparently bucked around in your bed and had to be restrained until the end of the day. At midnight, you stopped convulsing, and when morning came, you were still unmoving, and they released you from your restraints. 2 days later, you woke up. Does this have anything to do with this Josh fight people keep talking about?" He made a rude noise. "That's bullcrap. It was all staged to make people doubt. In a few days, when people start reporting the missing, and work records show that people have missed a week of work, they'll start putting the pieces together. Here," he said, putting down a brown satchel at the foot of my bed. "You can use this to see the facts we've compiled after I've gone. I have a feeling it will help you accept the facts as we see them." He got up then, pushing his chair back up against the wall and saying he'd see me tomorrow. Watch the videos. Let me know what you think. I'll be back for your thoughts later." And with that, he was gone. The videos were in a folder on the desktop. They were time-stamped, each of them ordered by when the incident took place. I put my mouse over the first, occurring at 8:15 that morning, and clicked play on the video. What popped up was a rip of a Facebook Live video. It was clearly shot from a cell phone, and the shaky cam was a little disorienting. It showed two people, one filming and one hovering just outside of camera view, as they followed a tall farm boy through the halls of the school. He was strong-looking, his corn silk hair swinging around his shoulders, and he looked more than a little confused as he blundered along. Alright, so this guy came blundering out of his class, almost hit my friend with the door, and now he's just walking up the halls. His teacher was freaking out for a minute, but he just kept walking. We thought he might be looking for something, so we followed him to see what was going on. The big farm boy walked through the halls like a trapped animal fleeing prey. His head snapped furtively right and left at every intersection, and he seemed driven to find something. The boys laughed as they followed him, thinking it was a joke or some kind of prank. He had cut down 3 more halls before he found what he was looking for, and the two oohed and hooted when the farm boy locked eyes with a smaller boy in a button-down shirt at the end of the hall. The 2 boys commented about the big farm boy having found his boyfriend, but to me, they looked like gunslingers getting ready to draw. When the smaller boy charged the bigger one, it took the farm boy completely by surprise. When his nose popped as the smaller boy jumped and headbutted him, the other 2 stopped laughing. The 2 fought, punching and kicking, as the larger one quickly gained the advantage. His hands found their way around the smaller boy's throat as the doors to the classroom started opening. The students rushed out to see what the commotion was. Suddenly, another boy punched a bigger one in the back of the head. Then another boy jumped into the fray. Suddenly, others were piling in, and the teachers and administrators were trying to separate them. When an adult dived into one of the other teachers as he tried to separate the combatants, his thumbs found the boy's eyes and pressed them into his skull, the screaming taking on a different level. Students were running, people were screaming, and the blood started to run down the struggling boy's face. The camera was knocked from the recorder's hand, and the video stopped suddenly. The next video was from 8:30, and it seemed to be from a traffic cam. Cars drove beneath the light, taking turns and waiting for their chance to cross. Suddenly, a car T-boned another car, and the drivers climbed out and began punching and kicking indiscriminately. One of them slammed the other's hand in the car door, pinning him, and as the man writhed, the other punched him until his blood flew across the side of the vehicle. Then he took his head and put it through the passenger side window, raking his throat across the glass as the blood sheeted down like a waterfall. After he was done, the man ran off down the street and out of camera view. I furrowed my eyebrows. What the hell was I watching? What did this video have to do with anything? Brown had collected a bunch of videos from fights. Big deal. What did any of this have to do with the supposed Josh fight? The stuff I had seen online was the fun kind of fighting. These videos were brutal. I got my answer in video 6. The next 3 videos were more traffic cam footage. A man in a hard hat suddenly landed on a man on the sidewalk, punching him even as he died from the fall. It appeared he had jumped right from the building they were constructing, but it was hard to tell for sure. The next was a pair of men suddenly running into camera view and slugging it out. One of them pulled out a knife and slit the other one's throat, but he continued to try to strangle him until he finally died in a pool of his own blood. The 5th was another vehicular crash. One of the drivers pulled the other driver out of the car, but it appeared he had died on impact. He left him on the street and ran off somewhere, just as the video ended. The weirdest part was, all 5 of these videos had happened at different times and in different places. 3 of the videos had clearly taken place in the United States, but one of them looked like it might be from Asia, and the last one had decidedly been in Europe, given the driving patterns. It was the weirdest thing. Why had he given me these videos? What was the point? As the 6th video started, I saw it was another cell phone cam. A man in a mall was drowning a child in a fountain. The scene looked vaguely Middle Eastern, and the people around them weren't speaking any language I understood. A woman was beating at the man's shoulder, trying to stop him, but she just kept repeating the same name again and again and again as she pounded weakly at the man. It was the only word I could understand, and the familiarity chilled me a little bit. Joshua, 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 Joshua. Have you ever been in a crowded place and heard someone calling your name? They aren't talking to you, but the sound of your name turns you to see who it is. Maybe it's even someone you know. Maybe it's someone you know who's being called. On a baser level, it's a desire to see someone else that has your name. We want to see who else has our name and for a few seconds feel a sense of brotherhood with them. You're two people amongst many, and such things make us feel strange, maybe a sense of togetherness as well. Hearing my name called as she begged him to stop drowning what could have very well been his own son made me feel a shared sense of horror. Horror that my own namesake could do such a thing. Horror that I might be capable of something like that. Video 7 was body cam footage of someone named Officer Grigg. Officer Grigg was running through a maze of small concrete corridors, talking to someone on the radio and begging for help. His partner had gone crazy. His partner had killed a kid, and now he was chasing him. Other officers were on the way, but Officer Grigg had heard shots from the complex up ahead. He was terrified that his partner had killed someone else. He came into the courtyard and froze, hugging the wall as he drew his gun. When he peeked around, I could see that the courtyard had 6 bodies sprawled out around the corner. They'd been killed as they tried to charge him, and as Officer Grigg peeked, he saw another crazy man running at the cornered officer. He shot him, his head exploding in a puff of red, and he fell down with the others in a twitching mass. Grigg stepped up then, training his gun on his partner as he approached slowly. "Mulder, just put it down, man. We can talk about this. We can..." Mulder turned to look at him, his eyes glazed and unseeing, just before his head snapped to the side and he fell against the wall. Grigg spun and fired without looking, and the last image I saw was another officer sliding down the wall, his eyes far away and his expression slack. The camera zoomed in on the dead officer's nameplate, and I read J. Myers. The next few videos were much like the others. Street fights, car accidents that turned violent, shaky videos that caught random acts of violence, and throughout all of them, people sometimes screamed Josh or Joshua. I wasn't sure how many I had watched, but the end result was always the same: murder, death, pain. I looked at the videos in that folder and felt sick. There were so many of them. I had watched less than 1/10 of them. There could be 10,000 on this laptop. How many of them would be like the ones I had seen before? Just random acts of violence that were not so random in the end. How many Joshes had really died that day because something in their heads told them to? I exited out of the folder, and that's when I saw a second folder that I had missed on first inspection. J. Holder was in the subject line in all caps. When I opened the folder, there were 7 videos inside. The first was at 8:30, and it looked like it might be another security cam video. The other 5 videos happened between 9:50 and midnight, with the 7th being around 5 a.m. I was hesitant to begin these videos, but there was something intriguing about them. Why had they been separated? Who was this guy? Joshua Holder, I assumed. I opened the first video and found footage from a convenience store CCTV. A blonde man in a black t-shirt was standing in line, waiting his turn. He was fidgeting, the old lady in line taking longer than she strictly needed to, and I could see him sigh as he tapped his foot. He had some snacks and a drink in his hand, and it looked like any other day in any other town. Then, and I had to rewind the video a few times to catch it, his eyes glazed over, and the snacks fell out of his hand. The owner must have yelled at him, because he looked up and made eye contact as the woman at the counter turned to look at him. Then, he rushed the counter, vaulted over it, and was lost to view as the woman screamed wordlessly and ran from the store. 5 minutes later, he left. His fists were bleeding, and his face looked to be dripping with something. The second video was at 9:50. It was short, less than a minute. A car was stopped at a light, waiting for the green light, when Holder approached the vehicle. He reached in, slammed the driver's face against the steering wheel, and dragged them from the car. Putting his head under the tire, he then proceeds to climb behind the wheel and drive away. The red smear on the concrete told me everything I needed to know. The third video was another body cam shot at 10:40. An officer identifies himself as Officer Felder and tells us that he's approaching the car for a routine traffic stop. As he comes up to the window, I saw Holder's face staring blankly back at him. Officer Felder begins his rehearsed line, but suddenly tapers off as he reaches for his gun. Holder pulls a gun from beside the door as the officer is fumbling with the strap and shoots him 6 times. As he falls, we see Holder dragging him back into his squad car, leaving the stolen vehicle behind. At 11:20, I got my next video of Holder. The next video is a security camera, seeing a police officer gunning down people in a courtyard. The video is familiar, though, and when I saw an officer peek around the corner, I realized it was the same one that I'd been watching earlier. It was Officer Grigg, as he tried to subdue his partner, but I was seeing it from a different angle. As Grigg approached, gun out but speaking soothingly, I could see Holder stepping out from another alley and leveling a pistol. He was wearing a uniform he had likely stolen from a cop, and after he shot, he stepped back out of sight. The other officer ran in then, and Griggs put him down without thinking. The next video, the 5th, was another CCTV video. A man in a uniform was walking through a crowded mall. People were running, screaming soundlessly as he gunned them down. Each shot was precise, each kill was clean, and only men seemed to fall at his hands. The footage whipped through a couple of different cameras, and the officer was deadly as he proceeded. In all, I watched him kill 7 men before he approached the door to the food court, flashing lights visible beyond. That was 4 p.m. by the timestamp. The next video was at 10, and it was news footage of Holder surrendering. He was getting on his knees, dressed in a blood-stained uniform, and police were taking him into custody. The news anchor was saying how Jeffrey Holder was responsible for the deaths of 15 people and had led police on a murder spree that had been capped off with his murder of 7 people at the Bayview Mall. Police did not believe he had any accomplices and were just glad to have the situation under control. But wait, I rewound the video as the name clicked. Jeffrey Holder, not Joshua Holder? Something didn't add up. I opened the last video, waving away an orderly with a dinner tray as I realized it was 7 at night. These videos had engrossed me for hours. I was sickened by them, shocked by them, but they had drugged me in and made me watch. These were my people dying, and I was reveling in the new sort of shared camaraderie. I was mourning for them as they fell. I was horrified for them as they succumbed to their baser instincts, and I was dreading what depravity might come next. Then there was this Jeffrey Holder, the worst of them all. I loaded up the last video and saw another security camera video of Holder in an interrogation cell. He was sitting at a long white table, hands cuffed to a metal ring, fidgeting as he had been in the convenience store. He was testing his restraints, checking his exits, and when the doors opened, a detective walked in to question him. The questions were expected. Why did you kill these people? What are your motives? Why did you do this? On and on and on. He sat there through it all in silence. Then the detective made a grave mistake. He leaned in close, wanting to ask Holder something quietly so the camera would have trouble hearing it. When Holder sank his teeth into his nose, he looked extremely surprised. When Holder had finished mutilating him, a scene that was very Silence of the Lambs, he maneuvered himself around and snaked the detective's key. A few short minutes later, and he was heading out the door that the detective had come in through. The camera continued to record the room as the detective's blood pooled there. When Brown came back the next day, I had moved 5 more videos into the Holder file. "You've been busy," he commented when I showed him. What happened after he escaped?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know, but needing to know. He made his way down to lockup with the detective's ID, killed a guard, and shot 7 men that were being held for violent crimes they'd committed that day. I'm pretty sure you can guess what their names were. He just kept killing, even after the rest snapped out of it. By the end of the 24 hours, there were very few left to snap out of it. The ones who fought and won snapped back at midnight. I remember coming to in a parking garage with blood on my hands and a knife in my pocket. I ran home, showered, and spent the rest of the day wondering what the hell had happened. Those who were unable to kill others, incarcerated or committed individuals, took their own lives in a fit of rage. The ones who were in a coma or were unable to take their own lives are all that's left. The final total is something like 5,000 Joshes worldwide. Why has no one noticed? I asked, astonished. Someone has, because they've been using the media to cover it up. They've been spreading false information in order to make people think it's a joke, a meme. But when people start noticing that their loved ones haven't come home, it'll be a little harder to sweep under the rug. Before he left, I asked him one more question. He had let me keep the laptop, telling me to observe the videos and see if I could find any more Holder sightings, which led me to my last question. I had seen him escape. I knew he had killed once, but I didn't know why. Why would he snap like that? He isn't a Josh. Also, why kill us? Brown shrugged. Who knows? All we know is that no one has seen him since the incident, and we're pretty interested in finding out where he is and what he's been up to. That was a week ago. Brown stopped returning my emails 2 days ago, and that's worrisome. The group he belongs to, a group of Joshes on Reddit, have been monitoring some things. They've noticed more Josh-related deaths since the incident. Someone is killing them. Someone is tracking us down, and I fear that Brown may be their latest victim. The message I got in my email yesterday was pretty clear about that. I will finish what I started, it said. It was signed, J. Holder. I grew up outside of Copenhagen. Most of my life spent on my father's sheep farm. It's beautiful country if you've never been, and I can think of no better place to spend my childhood. The rolling hills and forests are perfect for playing knights or policemen or whatever a child may want. The trees became my castles, the underbridges my banks or shops to chase robbers from, and I spent the hours outside of my chores letting my imagination run wild. That imagination was probably why no one believed me when I told them about the ravens. I had been telling tales since I was very young. I claimed I'd seen fairies dancing around a mushroom ring. I'd seen a parade of lights that had turned out to be the procession of Queen Mab, that I had seen dinosaurs in the forest, and black dogs, and kelpies, and all sorts of things. I loved stories, so I wanted to see something magical. The world was often such a dour place that I prayed for a little magic in my life, and created it until I could find my wish fulfilled. I was 9 when I found some of that magic, but I wasn't quite as ready as I believed I was. My grandparents lived less than a mile from our farm. Their property was at the back end of ours, truth be told, and when my gran called and said she had just baked a bunch of cookies and was hoping I could come help her eat some of the extras, I turned hopefully to my mum and asked if I could go over for some cookies. Mum asked if my chores were done, and I said they were. It was summer. I wouldn't have to go fill the sheep feeders till after dinner. I'd been diligent through the day, and now my midday was mine to do what I liked. "You may," Mum said, "but put on your slicker and your wellies. It looks like rain." A few minutes later, I was set out in my duck yellow slicker with my big green rubber gum boots on an adventure to Grandma's house. I found a stick on the way, my sword for this quest, and I was cutting through the sheep fields and heading for the little path between the fields. It was a place I liked to play sometimes, and my grandfather had told me it had once been the site of a great battle. He said old Danish kings were known to make war on each other, and the land around Copenhagen had seen a lot of bloodshed over the years. The area between the farms, but a quarter-mile of dirt road, was said to have been the site of several skirmishes, and I wonder now how many had lost their lives there. As a child, however, it was just fun to think of knights fighting each other as their steel clanged and the horses whinnied. I heard the thunder rumble, something that was not the loud sound of hooves charging forward, and thought that Mum was right. The rain would be coming soon, If I didn't want to get wet, I needed to hurry. Getting wet wasn't really something I was too worried about, but Gran liked to keep the house nice and dry, and a wet little boy was likely to be asked to leave after he'd eaten only a few cookies. I came out onto the road, racing the rain, but I wasn't alone. Perched on the wooden fence, which separated the road from the fields, were ravens. I don't mean crows or blackbirds. I mean ravens. If you've never seen them together, then you might not understand, but ravens are quite a bit larger than crows. They are more than a little scary looking too, especially to a child not yet 10. I expected they would take flight when I came onto the road, but they did not. They sat looking at me like hateful old men watching a trespasser, and it was clear that they would not leave simply because I was there. They were proud birds, and this was their place, and it was I who was the interloper. It was spooky, but I wasn't really afraid of them. I was a little scared. There were a lot of them, and I was a small boy, but I didn't think they would hurt me. These were no boogeymen, no trolls or goblins, and they were more spooky than scary. Papa put out straw men to keep these devils out of the garden. They were birds, and birds couldn't hurt me. "Boy," said a voice, and I froze in my tracks. "Boy," it said again, and I looked around to see who had spoken. Was it one of the ravens? Ravens could speak. I'd heard that somewhere, and maybe these ravens had picked up a word or two. Mum said ravens were smart after all, so it wasn't that hard to imagine that it could be them talking. I kept walking, trying not to look at them as I went. They were just birds. They didn't want anything from me. Birds didn't talk to people. They just, "Boy, stop," the same croaky voice said. That drew me up short. The bird had told me to stop, so I had. I felt a chill run up my spine as I turned to look at the group of crows. A murder. It was a murder when it was crows. And I saw one that was different. His feathers were white. They weren't gray. They were snow white. His beak and legs were black, the color his feathers ought to be, but his eyes were the most frightening part of him. They were red, like a rat's eyes, and they stared at me with far too much intelligence. We just stood there for a while, staring at each other as the thunder built overhead, and I started to wonder if I had imagined the whole thing. It was still just a bird, so it had two words. What of it? Didn't mean it was different from the rest or anything. "Thank you, boy," it said, its speech perfectly understandable, if not a little raspy. "I was not sure you would stop for a moment. I have to ask a favor of you, but in return I will grant you any wish you desire." I looked around, expecting to see someone standing nearby throwing their voice, but it was just me and the ravens. The thunder rumbled again overhead, but the rain coming on fast behind me was the least of my concerns. Now I was more worried about the talking raven with the white feathers. I started to say, not sure how to answer. "Are you talking to me?" The raven appeared to chuckle, a clicking sound that the others picked up quickly. "Well, who else would I be talking to? You and I are the only ones talking out here, are we not?" I nodded, supposing that was so. "So I am here to offer you your heart's desire. in exchange for a favor of my asking. Do you agree?" I started to nod. I was very close to just nodding before learning more, but Papa had always been very clear about blindly accepting things. Papa was a man who had worked to get where he was, and he always told me to be wary of deals that seemed too good to be true. Anyone who wants you to sign on the dotted line without letting you read the contract is trying to trick you out of something, and it's often something you wouldn't want to try to live without, he would say, and I remembered his words in the nick of time. "How is it that you can talk?" I asked, and the bird ruffled a little at the question. "Well, ravens are smart, everyone knows this, but I am a Val Raven, and I am smarter than any of my brethren. Do you know why?" I did know why, as it happened. Grandfather had told me about the Val Ravens, just as he had told me about the trolls and the gnomes and the other magical creatures that inhabit our old world. "Val Ravens are ravens that have eaten the flesh of a king," I said, and the bird seemed to smile as much as a beak could smile. "Very close, boy. Val Ravens have eaten the heart of a king. It was right here, actually, a very long time ago. Would you like to hear about it?" I nodded. Very much. My grandfather told me this place had seen many battles. "Your grandfather is wise," the white bird said. "I was barely in my first year when I saw the pinions and banners waving. We were more interested in the men carrying them, however, my murder and I. In those days, when men with banners went somewhere, they were often bodies in the place where they stopped to do battle. Banners we were following that day. They did not do well, and we fell on them after the fighting was done and ate our fill. I found him then, the man with the shiny hat. I did not know he was a king, not then. I only knew that his hat had caught the light when the sun came out from behind a cloud, and it drew me to him. His armor was broken, and his blood was running free. Someone had pierced his heart with a lance, and I ate it happily. It was meat, and meat was good. But as I ate, I began to know things. I knew that the meat was a heart, and the hat was a crown, and the king was named Lenthal. His castle was far from here, in a place called Wales, and he would never go home again. Never again. I also knew something else. I knew I would never die until I gained what I needed. I would never truly live. That is why I need you, boy. You have what I need, and to get it, I am willing to make a deal with you. Whatever you desire shall be yours, but only if you agree to give me what I need." For the second time that day, I was prepared to agree. My family was not rich, though we were better than most, and there were things I needed, just like any child. A new bike, a box kite, a real sword, a horse, a stable of horses. I could have anything I wanted. The Val Raven was magic. Grandfather had said so. But as I opened my mouth, I remembered something else Grandfather had told me. The Val Raven is a smart but tricksy bird. It knows it can only be human if it gains what it most desires, he had said, puffing his pipe as he sat before the fire. "And what does it most desire?" "Grandfather?" I asked, scooting a little closer as I waited for him to tell. I expected it to be treasure or a magic book or true love or something from the usual stories, but it was much worse than that. My grandfather leaned back and looked me in the eye as he delivered the answer, and I realized now that it had been intended to scare me. Grandfather believed in the things he talked about, trolls and redcaps and Val Raven, and he wanted me to be wary of them as well. After that night, I certainly was wary, and it surprises me now that it took me so long to remember that night as I sat before the fire, listening to the tales. "A child's heart," he almost whispered, and as I stood there in the road, I heard that same whisper creep up my spine like a spider in the dead of night. "Do we have a deal?" the Val Raven asked, but I was already backing away. I shouldn't have talked to it. I shouldn't have stopped. And as I began to run, I heard the Val Raven quark angrily as the murder took flight. I was running as fast as I could, the raindrops beginning to fall as my feet ate up the ground. I could see the lane that would take me to my grandparents' house, but it looked miles long as the beat of wings sounded behind me. There were so many of them, a whole murder of them, and I fancied that my slicker rustled as they dove at me. The rain was falling hard now, the drops becoming a downpour, and I expected their talons to find me any minute. When the angry quark began to sound behind me, I looked back to see them flying drunkenly as the rain soaked them. Later I would find out that birds don't usually fly in the rain because it makes their feathers heavy, which makes their movements difficult and their steering and maintaining flight almost impossible. If they had come after me on a sunny day, I would have been ripped apart. Ravens are large, and in such numbers, I would have been unable to hold them off. Instead, the rain thwarted them, and I made it to my grandparents' house in one piece. Grandma was a little miffed at the mud and the water that I had tracked in, but I think she realized something was wrong when she found me curled up in a corner of her mud room in tears. She asked me what had happened, clearly afraid that someone had tried to snatch me or some such thing, but I just kept shaking my head and whispering, "Val Raven, Val Raven," until she called my grandfather from the den and asked him what I was saying. Grandfather listened. He nodded, and then he took me in his arms and brought me into the den to sit by the fire. Grandmother came in a few minutes later with cookies and milk, and we sat and listened to the rain, Grandfather asking me if I'd seen one of the tricksy birds. I nodded, and he nodded in return. That was all that was ever said about it. After my cookies were eaten, he put me in his old truck and took me home. We never spoke of it again, and it was never brought up between anyone after that.